My name is Vorruk-9, Senior Observer for the Galactic Diplomatic Registry, and I have catalogued over 400 species across 11 star systems. I have watched the Gelthari dissolve their enemies with song. I have witnessed the Prin Collective absorb an entire moon for breakfast. I have seen things truly terrible and magnificent things that would make most beings question the very fabric of existence itself. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for humans. It started on a Tuesday. Apparently, that matters to them. The human vessel, designation the undisputed champion of absolutely nothing, which, yes, was the actual registered name of the ship, docked at Orbital Station Veluun at approximately 0900 hours Galactic Standard Time. Our station chief, a very calm and very dignified Morthine named Supervisor Drax, had reviewed the briefing files on humans exactly once, nodded slowly, and then quietly resigned from his post. He left a note. It said, "Not today." So that left me. I walked to the docking bay with my translator unit, my diplomatic badge, my emergency sedative kit, and what remained of my self-respect. The airlock hissed, the door opened, and out walked 3 humans, led by their captain, a short, loud, grinning creature named Bixby Wren, who immediately pointed at the ceiling of our station and said, with tremendous confidence, I could absolutely parkour that. His 2 crew members, a tall, red-haired woman named Oona Foss, and a very quiet, very intense man who introduced himself only as Pickle, nodded in agreement as if this was a perfectly reasonable assessment of an orbital station. Ceiling. I introduced myself. I extended the traditional Morthine greeting, which involves lowering all 3 of your eye stalks in a gesture of peace and welcome. Bixby Wren looked at my eye stalks, then looked at his crew, then looked back at me and whispered very seriously, "Do you know you have 3 eyes?" I confirmed that, yes, I was aware. He seemed genuinely relieved. The tour of the station was scheduled for 90 minutes. It took 6 hours. This was because Oona Foss stopped at every single piece of equipment and asked what would happen if she pressed the button, every single one. She did not press any of the buttons. To be absolutely clear, she just needed to know. She claimed it was theoretical curiosity. I began to believe this was some kind of ritual. Meanwhile, Pickle, who had still not offered a surname or any personal information beyond that single-word introduction, had somehow befriended every single member of our engineering staff. He was not speaking to them, they were not speaking to him. But he was walking alongside them with his arms crossed, nodding at machinery, and they were nodding back, and somehow an entire culture of silent mutual respect had formed in under 40 minutes. I have no explanation for this, and Bixby Wren, their captain, was on his communicator the entire time, apparently arguing with someone called Aunt Drea about whether or not he had returned a piece of cookware he had borrowed 3 years ago. This argument was ongoing and showed no signs of resolution. At lunch, we brought them to the station dining hall. This was my first real mistake. I had prepared traditional Veluun hospitality dishes. 17 courses, carefully selected, culturally significant. We had spent 2 weeks preparing the menu with input from human dietary records. Bixby Wren looked at the 17 courses, looked at me, and asked if there was any hot sauce. We did not have hot sauce. He produced his own. From his jacket, he had brought hot sauce to a diplomatic first contact lunch. It was in a small bottle with a drawing of a screaming face on it, and the label read, "Regret in a bottle," and he used it on every single course, including the ceremonial dessert that our head chef, Sudrelian Vork, had spent 4 days constructing, from memory-infused moon sugar. Vork watched this happen from across the room with the expression of someone witnessing the slow, polite destruction of everything they had ever believed in. Then Oona Foss declared the moon sugar dessert, quote, "Actually incredible though," and Vork immediately forgave everything and asked her if she wanted the recipe. She said yes. She pulled out a physical paper notebook. She wrote the recipe down in pen. An actual pen. Vorruk nearly fainted from what I can only describe as pure, overwhelmed joy. I stood there, surrounded by the most baffling species I had ever encountered, and I thought to myself, this is either the beginning of the greatest diplomatic relationship in galactic history, or the end of the station, possibly both. I looked at my notes. I looked at my emergency sedative kit. I put the sedative kit away. Something told me I was going to need to be fully conscious for whatever came next. I want to be very clear about something. When I filed my morning report to the Galactic Diplomatic Registry, I used the word manageable. I wrote with my own 3 hands that the human delegation was, quote, unusual but manageable. I submitted that report at 0800 hours. By 0802 hours, Bixby Wren had already found the maintenance corridor behind the reactor wing and was inside it. Nobody had told him it was there. Nobody had given him access. He had simply noticed that one of the wall panels looked a little loose, and had, in his own words, just checked. He was not alarmed by this. He was delighted. Vorruk, he called out from inside the wall, because yes, we were already on a first-name basis, apparently. There is an entire second station in here. Did you know about this? It was not a second station, it was a maintenance corridor. But I had a feeling that explaining the difference to Bixby Wren was going to take longer than I had available. Pickle retrieved him. This is the moment Pickle finally spoke, by the way, after an entire day of silence and subtle nods and the quiet accumulation of engineering friendships. Pickle leaned into the open wall panel and said, in a very calm and unhurried voice, "Bixby, out." Bixby came out. I stared at Pickle. He shrugged. "Works every time," he said. Then he went back to standing near machinery and nodding at it. I added a full page of notes about Pickle to my registry file. I titled it, Unknown Variable. I underlined it twice. Now, Oona Foss. Oona had spent the morning in our station library, which is not a library in the human sense, but a living archive where our memory keepers, the Drelvos monks of the Veluun order, store centuries of oral history inside their own biological neural networks. They share this history through a harmonic resonance process that takes years to learn and is considered deeply sacred. Oona walked in, sat down cross-legged on the floor, and listened for 45 minutes without saying a single word. Then, she looked at the eldest monk, a being named High Keeper Su, who had been performing this sacred resonance work for over 2 centuries, and said, "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Can you teach me the first part?" High Keeper Su, who had never in 200 years been asked this question by an outsider, blinked all 4 of his eyes at once. Then he sat down across from her and began to teach her. By the time I arrived, panicking, she had already learned the opening harmonic sequence of the creation song of Veluun Station, a piece that monks study for a minimum of 8 years before performing publicly. She had learned it in 40 minutes. She was humming it. High Keeper Su looked like he had just discovered a new star with his bare hands. He told me, in a voice full of an emotion I could not name, "She hears the resonance. She hears it the way we do." Then he turned back to Oona and said, "Again, I left them there." There was nothing else to do. The afternoon brought the delegation meeting. This was the official, formal, seated, structured diplomatic exchange between human representatives and the 12 Council of Veluun Station. I had prepared the agenda. I had printed the agenda. I had laminated the agenda. Bixby Wren picked up the laminated agenda, tapped it on the table twice like he was testing its structural integrity, nodded with approval, and then set it down and said, "So, quick question before we start. What is everyone afraid of? Like, genuinely afraid of? I find that helps." The council chamber went completely silent. Council Elder Prune, a being who had survived 4 interstellar negotiations and 1 near war, looked at Bixby Wren for a long moment. Then he said slowly, "Irrelevance." Bixby pointed at him and said, "Okay, good. Real answer. I respect that." He turned to the next council member. "You?" 40 minutes later, every single member of the 12 Council had shared their deepest institutional fear, and Bixby Wren had responded to each one with a human phrase I had to look up, which turned out to be, "Yeah, that tracks." And somehow the tension in that room had dissolved completely. Council Elder Prune was leaning forward in his chair. The others were talking over each other. Nobody was performing anymore. Bixby had not followed the agenda. He had not used a single prepared talking point. He had simply asked people what scared them, and then made them feel like that fear was reasonable and shared. I sat in the corner of that room, holding my laminated agenda, and I felt something I had not expected to feel at a diplomatic function. I felt hopeful. Later, when the formal session ended and the humans were preparing to return to their ship, I walked them back to the docking bay. Oona was still humming the creation song softly. Pickle was carrying a small potted station plant that one of the engineers had apparently just given him, no explanation offered or requested. Bixby was back on his communicator. "Andrea," he was saying, "I am telling you, I returned that pot. I remember returning it. I was wearing the blue jacket." He turned to me just before stepping through the airlock. "Hey, Vorruk, good station, weird ceiling. Tell Vorruk that moon sugar thing was genuinely top 5 meals of my life. I mean that." Then he walked through the airlock, the door closed, and the ship registered under the name, the undisputed champion of absolutely nothing, detached from Orbital Station Veluun and drifted out into open space. I stood there for a very long time. Then I opened a fresh registry file, set the classification to ongoing, and typed the only title that felt accurate. Humans. Category, unknown. Threat level, unclear. Recommendation, do not look away, not even once. I saved the file. Then I went to find Sudrelian Vorruk, because apparently he had already started making a second batch of moon sugar dessert. And he wanted to know if I thought the humans would come back. I told him yes. I had absolutely no doubt about that at all.